So this is a free lecture, and it's free because I'm basically, to be blunt and honest, I'm trying to sell my book. This is a promotional lecture, but I thought I would talk a little bit about actually not one book, but two books that are available to you. Right. The two books are called Literally. And the other one, which I didn't announce, is called ABC for Adults. So they're basically two books. Now, there's a history with me and books, okay? Because I've been I've been a calligrapher for more than, well, it's been I was counting and then I felt old. It's been 35 years working as a professional calligrapher. I came home from London in 1989, at the end of 1989, and I've worked as a professional calligrapher in Norway since then. So quite a while. And the calligraphy bit started off as a hobby, and I won't go into that. It's a long biographical background, and I won't bore you with it. But it will suffice to say that I got a broad edge pen from my father when I was 9, approximately. I picked it up. I was fascinated by a demo he made with the pen. And basically, it's one of those things that I got a kick out of it, and I can't really explain it. And I think musicians have the same with music. I sometimes do with music, although I'm no musician myself. I've played a little bit, but I never got there quite. So I'm envious. Um, but yeah, so it's kind of a fascination with letters that is hard to explain somehow, and yeah, and so the broadest, and then I wrote a thesis on calligraphy when I was in upper secondary school in Norway, which is called videregående, when you're about from 15, 16 till you're about 18, 19. And uh, after that, I was reading beat poetry and I was trying to cut my own bamboo pen. My father had sent me a couple of books over the years, including Writing, Illuminating, and Lettering by Edward Johnston from the 1920s. Um, yeah, and it was fascinating. I was ruling up lines for a manuscript even, and not knowing what I was doing with an Osmiroid broad edge pen, like one of those fountain pens. And my calligraphy was quite bad. So I didn't finish a manuscript book then, but when I went to London, we did actually write books by hand. We did manuscript books by hand, ruling up the lines and writing them out. Now, it was one spread maximum, so I only did one spread, but I did finish a few manuscript books after that, from what I'd learnt during my first year. Now, I would like to say to start with that I don't think we really come out of nowhere and just become musicians or calligraphers or whatever becomes of us. I think we're learning from other people, and I would like to say that I cannot underestimate the influence of my teacher Anne Camp, who taught me when I studied in England from 87 till 89. And I came back to Norway. She suggested I apply for fellowship of the Society of Scribes and Illuminators, which I did in the fall of 89, and I was unanimously accepted as a fellow. I'm no longer a fellow because I don't pay my subscriptions, basically. I'm in Norway, so the subscriptions are expensive to me. Um, right, the books. So from a handmade book to and a thesis on calligraphy, not a thesis like a doctoral thesis or anything like that. This was a thing that we did as a theme over a couple of weeks, from what I remember, and we chose our own subject. So that's what I did. I did a history on letters. Now, when I came back to Norway, I was asked by the Norwegian Broadcasting Corporations to do a series of talks and programs about letters and calligraphy. So I did that. And they asked me to produce a tiny little booklet. And that was my first book. It's called Calligraphy. It's not great. It's this is the last exemplar as well. It's damaged spine. It's in Norwegian. I don't think I'm crazy about the title or anything now, but it's cheaply produced and it's one of those easy little things. It's got a history of letters and then it's got samples and diagrams and proportions and everything. It's similar to Herman Sapp's Rottering Manual of Calligraphy, and which I'd been looking at. Again, an influence from another person. Herman Sapp is a living legend. But yeah, so that was my first book, and then I approached Aschehoug Publishing Company in Norway, and I produced this book, which is a handbook on calligraphy, and this is 1994. I think the color scheme is kind of a little bit weird. This blind embossing is not a true blind embossing. It was done early on in Photoshop. Not crazy about that either. Not crazy about the gray on purple. But there we are. We learn as we go along, and it's got color images at the end. Hang on. Yeah, so it's got this kind of thing. It's got a few colored pages in it. So that was 1994. And then, yeah, so a few years went by and I worked as a calligrapher. I did this book called Bokstavelig, which means literally in English. It's in Norwegian. It's one text for all the letters of the alphabet. No, sorry, that's the other book. This book is it has different essays on different phenomena connected to letters. Now, this then became what I will talk about later, which is literally. But 20 years passed. Yeah, it's 2005, so exactly 20 years back, this book. After that, I made two more books. This abstracts, sorry, which one? This abstracts, which is a book on abstract calligraphy, which has not been, it was printed digitally, so the print is not great, but it was printed by a wonderful group of people in Moss, Oslo, outside of Oslo, House of Foundation, which is a publishing company and a bookstore in Moss. There's that, and along with that, they printed this in Norwegian, ABC for voksne, which I then translated a few years later into ABC for adults. So this one's also being republished today, and I will get to that after. Then I spent 10 years making this thing, and this is a greasy exemplar that I have. I'm out of them. I only have, I think I have four of them left, and I want to save them because I want to give them to a rare person who might want one at one point, and I don't want to get rid of all my exemplars, but this is a rare greasy one. It's a landscape format book. It's well produced. It's got nice paper, and it's sewn and wonderfully printed for color, and it's out of print. So this, I spent 10 years doing this, and it was based on my previous works, obviously. In fact, what I wanted to do with this big thing that took 10 years was to translate this little thing into English, and I thought, I'll do that in a week. But yeah, 10 years passed. What we're going to do today is I'm going to show you the books and I'll go through them. Now, there are two of them. So, this, literally, in English, and ABC for Adults, in English. They're both hardbacks, and they're available to order. The literally book is, I'm really excited to republish it because I've got three new essays at the end, and those are called Anti-Design. And there's one called Codex, which is about the book, which I started talking about. And then there's one on reproductions, which it is talking about all kinds of phenomena connected with reproducing our letters. It means making typefaces. It means trying to replicate Arrighi's 1560 handwriting model into wood carving and then reproducing digitally his wood carving, or copying Arrighi's letters directly with a broad edge pen. All kinds of reproductive phenomena connected with letters and lettering calligraphy, typography, handwriting. These are the new chapters. Now, I will go through the book and I'll talk a little bit about each little thing, and I hope you'll get something out of it. Yeah. On the notes, on what kinds of books are these? Because they are books that are meant to be read as little snippets, okay, if you like. The the literally book, I'll get to the ABC for adults, but the literally book is about 19 little essays or articles about anything connected with letters, and they're only about 2 to 3 pages each. So it shouldn't be difficult because we're losing attention now and it affects our reading. So if you want to give this to someone where you want to kind of force feed a little, gently force feeding them a little bit of the dull stuff we're interested in, we as lettering artists, then you can use this book as an excuse to do that, or you can just get it for yourself. Okay, so what I'm going to do is going to share my screen and then talk a little bit about the book. I just want to mention what this heading is. It is in fact a typeface, but it's based on my calligraphy. So I have digitized a Roman capital, very light in weight, and I did this a couple of years back, but it's not published as a font, but I'm using it as a font on my title page. So there we are. Let me go full screen so that you can see. There we are. Right, so that's my title page. So as you can see, you've got a double L, which is it's not a ligature. What is it? It's a special glyph that I made for this occasion. The RA, of course, is a swash flourished R with an A connected to it, which means it's a ligature. Actually, I've got a chapter on ligatures, ampersands of ligatures in here. I'll get to that in a minute. So this is the content page. And yeah, two people I want to thank. Of course, it's written in memory of Anne Camp, my calligraphy teacher in England, who I was very fond of. He died a few years back. And I want to thank Gareth Colgan in Dublin, a wonderful colleague and friend who has helped me. He criticized my text. Thank you. I needed it. Okay, even a few corrections, and wonderful help, immeasurable help. And Megan Maximovich, who works as an assistant to Ewan Clayton, my friend and colleague in Brighton, and she's a wonderful friend, and she's been helping me to support me, and she also read through the text. So thank you both for helping me out. Now, there's a text on Gothic. Now, don't be alarmed, okay? I'm showing you Nazis. I'm showing you a punk royale R's, not the actual R's, the R's of a pair of pants, to point out something, and the answer to that pointing out is on the side here, because Gothic letters have been used for anything from Hitler to punk to skating on skateboards in California to pubs, as you know, to Jägermeister, to Satan, to Satanistic rock bands, and to Jesus Christ. So, the Gothic script, is it a fashion? Is it rebellion? Is it propaganda? Well, it's all those things, and sometimes it's just beautiful letters. And this is a very interesting fact I want to point out, and that's the fact that the Nazis actually they banned the use of Gothic, and this is the letter that bans the use of Gothic in 1941, and it's signed Bormann, top Nazi, and interestingly enough, letterhead is set in Gothic. And what are they saying about Gothic letters? Having used them for so long, having said that the Gothic letters are so particularly German in essence, well, they're saying that they're Jüdische Schwabenlettern. Pardon my German, I don't speak German. They're calling them Jewish letters, which they're absolutely totally not, because the Jewish had their own Hebrew alphabet. Now, another thing that they did was that they imprisoned, the Nazis imprisoned people using uh, functionalistic aesthetics, things like a sans serif. But here they're using a sans serif for the Olympics in 1936. So definitely in the Bauhaus tradition, although it's not asymmetrical, though centered. So there's a lot of inconsistencies when it comes to the use of Gothic, particularly by the Nazis. Now, calligraphers are mostly interested in these things from an aesthetical point of view, and this is a piece of calligraphy using a Shakespeare quote, a favorite Shakespeare quote, "Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments," and then a sub categorization of the different Gothics. And there's my Fraktur typeface that I made, which is work in progress, 2014. So one of the things that I'm doing in this book, literally, is that I'm using some of my unpublished typefaces to talk about what's going on in the actual text. So Letters of Things, Not Pictures of Things, talks about the origin of letters and how we're not using letters anymore as pictograms, although in some cases we want the curly swirly copperplate. This is from a typeface called Bickham Script by Richard Lipton, based on the work of George Bickham, the Universal Penman. Now, this mother and child kind of using letters as illustrations in quite a nice way. The only thing I dislike here is this letter spacing. In a sense, I think the HEER too close, and then child being very thin. It should be slightly heavier, I feel. Anyways, there's talk of the difference and similarity between Latin and Arabic and Japanese Chinese calligraphy. Here's some work by Carl-Georg Hofer on the side, which is a typeface by his. So I do treat typefaces and calligraphy next to one another. This is a wonderful addition to this literally book, and it's by my esteemed colleague in California, the signwriter Carl Roars, and it's a text from Jack Kerouac's On the Road, but it's actually in the wording of Bob Dylan, who misquoted Jack Kerouac's On the Road in a film. So we've had quite an interesting discussion about that. Now, there's a chapter on this man, which is familiar to all calligraphers. He's called Edward Johnston, and it's a wonderful picture of him with a quill. Apparently, they had a visitor, a friend of Bernard Leach, the potter, who said, he looks like some strange bird looking at him. This would all be familiar to the London Underground letters. Any of you who've been to London can see it in use today, so it's been used since then. This is the original drawing from that. Here's a discussion on calligraphy versus sans serifs, and also the more geometrical drawings of Futura by Paul Renner, which is definitely a Bauhaus kind of typeface. I know I'm bombarding you with names now, but it's all in the book. There's discussions about the serif and the Roman inscriptions, and this is from the wonderful, let me zoom in because I really love this inscription. I only saw it live when I went to Rome to teach last year, and I got to climb over a scaffolding and take these pictures when no one saw me. Wonderful. It's certainly on the level of the Trajan inscription. I mean, it's bolder and it's slightly different endings on some strokes, but it really is wonderful. The tail that wagged the dog is actually about the serif. Okay, and about this discovery by Cottish, who I need to keep an eye on the time. Yes. So by Cottish, Edward Cottish, who was a priest, art historian, and a signwriter from Chicago, who discovered that the broad edge brush had indeed made at least the best examples of Roman capitals and formed what we call the serif, which later on entered into our tradition of letters and typography in the Renaissance, where we find them on the Littera Antica, which then has its own evolution and story. I'm putting this in. I could have put in an alphabet of my own in here, but I wanted to put in this because it's such a lovely, that was used in the first Bokstavelig in Norwegian. It's a brush alphabet by John Stevens, who's definitely the modern master of the brush. So I would suggest to anyone wanting to learn anything about it to get his book on brush Roman lettering. His name's John Stevens, maybe from John Neal Books, something like that. You can find it. Google it online. Here's some interpretations of some modern Roman letters, and there's discussions about details and serifs in modern typefaces, and then a piece of lettering of my own exploring Wusterferon lettering. Small is beautiful, obviously about small letters, about size, and these are pieces by the wonderful calligrapher Rudolf Spearmann, who worked in Germany, and yeah, he was in a prison camp for a long time. It's just wonderful what it is. His work is stacked away in a museum now, in called the Klingsborg Museum. Is in Offenbach outside of Frankfurt. I would suggest to anyone to go there and have a look. This is a tiny manuscript, uh, basically by the Boxei Hofnagel manuscript. Now, the illuminations were made first, and then, sorry, the calligraphy was made first, and then the illuminations were put in after the fact by two wonderful artists. So, about the art and crafts movement, I'm speeding this up a little. I have many pages to go through. Now, I want to read something just from this page. I know it's not aesthetically interesting, but it's interesting because we live in times where some human values and some arts, crafts, products, or even simple aesthetical considerations are under threat from not only computers but AI. And I want to read this because it's from a book, Stones of Venice, and this is 19th century critique of the Industrial Revolution. Quote, John Ruskin, "It is not that men are ill-fed, but that they have no pleasure in the work by which they make their bread, and therefore look to wealth as the only means of pleasure. Men were not intended to work with the accuracy of tools, to be precise and perfect in all their actions. If you will have that precision out of them, and make their fingers measure degrees like cogwheels, and their arms strike circles like compasses, then you must unhumanize them." And then I will proceed to talk about William Morris and the impact of the arts and crafts movement on the world of letters and book design and type design. In short, so the material aspect of letters, which in Norwegian we can call materialitet, or the materiality of letters. It doesn't ring well in English, but yeah, it's about the material aspects of letters, which I also debate in the chapter on reproductions later on. All kinds of in the influence of the tool on the letters, the influence of the tool on typefaces. Here's a bit of Origi again. There's this funny thing from a toilet in what used to be, at least still is in a sense, a favorite bar of mine in Oslo called Teddy's Soft Bar. It actually said the term punk used to mean somebody in prison who sucks dick for cigarettes. And then it was frequented by a lot of rock and rollers and punk rockers and what have you. And someone's erased the word punk. I found it to be funny to put in a chapter on the materiality of letters, quite simply on handwriting. And I don't need to talk a lot about handwriting. I think we're all frustrated that it's being removed from schools these days. It's no longer part of the curriculum. They say they want to teach it, but they don't have models to teach, and the teachers can't write, so they can't show the students how to hold a pen, which letters to write, how to connect them, etc. So there's a chapter on that, which is quite extensive. This is my own copy of the first illustrated handwriting model in Europe by Ludovico degli Arrighi, 1522, and I decided during the Corona to copy the whole thing, basically. Uh, so I did. Um, yeah, this is my handwriting model. Um, right, and there's a story of the indentation, or the how they marked off paragraphs with a paragraph mark in the old days, and these are all different typefaces. Um, one of them is mine. Guess which? So yeah, all kinds of phenomena. Of course, most people who think about calligraphy or manuscripts, who are lay people, would think about the illuminations before anything else. And there's a chapter on illuminations also, and also how, sorry, the initial, not illuminations in themselves, although they're often connected, the initials, and then how the initials are used typographically at the starting of chapters, etc. The hierarchy of scripts, used on a sample page, which I designed on Cervantes' novel using the hierarchy of scripts. Um, Ampersands and ligatures. Now, this is what I mentioned before. So here I'm using this. These are all ampersands taken from my own typefaces, which have not been published. Why don't I publish them? Well, there's, first of all, how can I make money selling typefaces these days? The market is flooded by really bad typefaces. I'm trying to make good ones. I'm not saying they're genius, but I'm trying. But I can't see how I can compete because it's just over. It was flooded with bad typefaces, and I'm trying to find out how I can actually use them in the best possible way and possibly even make money out of them. But at the moment, I'm just making them. This is a wonderful logo from the Victorian Albert Museum. This is the story of the ampersand from Roman times and up to more modern typefaces, including the Trajan, the Poetica by Robert Slimbach, the Trajan inscriptional one, but designed by Carol Twombly of Adobe. And then I think these are from uh, glyphs from Trajan. Yeah, they're two glyphs from Julian Waters's wonderful font Waters titling. So different ligatures and ampersands. The explosive moment bit, let me zoom into this, is, now we can see the low resolution. It's okay on print though because it's small. But yeah, let's try the lower one. Oops. Uh, it snaps to the other page. That's the problem. So this is the very stern and strict Roman capital work of Friedrich Poppel, German typographer, and he's just incredibly disciplined. But then all of a sudden he starts doing this kind of thing. Now it's a story of how the ruling pen came into a modern Latin calligraphy tradition, more or less by chance. And here's a piece by Werner Schneider, who was a student of him, of student of Friedrich Poppel. Optical sizes in typography, there's a bit on that. There's a bit on numerals, which are actually called uh, Arham Hindaya by the Arabs. So we in Europe often call them Arabic numerals, whereas in fact the Arabs are calling them Indian numerals, or Arham Hindaya. So the Arabs got them from the Indians, and the Europeans got them from the Arabs through Ludovici, through Fibonacci or Fibonacci during the 1300s. Okay, and I had to put in these wonderful numerals by Hermann Zapf from his typeface. I'll just, okay, Jan Schishold, I'm nearing the end of this book, and I think I'm doing okay for time. So Jan Schishold was a fascinating person. Now, in this book, I'm debuting my own typeface called Honest Sans, which has not been published, and I'm using it for some of the quotes inside of the book and for some of the smaller things in the, I think in the, well, actually on the cover a little bit and on the back of the book. Yeah, he was Jan Schischel was the son of a signwriter, and early on when he was in his 20s, he did calligraphy and handmade lettering. And then he saw a Bauhaus exhibition of the graphic work and he was sold. So he went for it and he wrote this book called the Neue Typography, where he advocates the use of the strict use of only grotesque or sans serif typefaces. Everything should be asymmetrical, and he also wants to disband the use of capital letters in normal plain text. Um, Now he has a second turning because he was first imprisoned, like many people from the Bauhaus. Then he was let out, and he took his family to Switzerland, and there he started working with more classically orientated letters, and he even designed work for Penguin, which he was very much famous for later on. And this is for a pamphlet on Valium for La Roche. Yeah, here's Jan Schischel. I think it's probably taken in England during his work for Penguin Books, which he totally redesigned. He's done a lot to bring people to heighten people's awareness of typography and good book design. His Sabon typeface, excellent Antiqua, or how do you say in English, old style typeface. Now, here's my chapter on design, anti-design, and it's more or less, it's the most essayistic, I think, bit of this, and it's hardly illustrated at all. Again, a quote from Dao Te Ching. I'm referencing to arts and crafts movement, to the use of space, to what we actually mean when we say we design something. And yeah, it's actually the only essay that has quite a few footnotes when it comes to reading material. This is from Pompeii. She's holding a stylus, which is a metal pen, but it can only scratch into things. So it scratches into wax. And what she's holding in her hand is a diptych, which are two, the codex means a chunk of wood. So they had chunks of wood, they hollowed them out, filled them with wax, and then wrote with stylus onto the wax, and then they could close. They hinged the two pieces of wood together, so it became the first book in a sense. It's just one spread. They could do notes in the wax, and then they would warm up the wax by rubbing the end of the stylus, which was rounded, onto the wax, and then they could rewrite on it. So yeah, bring milk, take the dog for a walk, bring a knife, and stab Caesar at lunch, whatever they wanted. Right, and one of the most famous books of all time, Codex Sinaiticus, which was a Greek Bible handwritten in columns, 75 AD. The letterpress, of course, had an enormous impact on the book and book production in Europe. So I'm discussing that. This is my chapter on reproductions with the subtitle From Pen Engraver to Calligrapher and Digitizer. Here's a piece of Hermann Sapp's wonderful Fraktur capitals from his book Feder und Stickel, which he wrote when he was in his 20s, and then it was engraved by August Rosenberger and printed shortly after the Second World War. Actually, a few years later, 47, I think, 47, 48. A collaboration between a calligrapher and an engraver there. And discussing his work, his collaboration again with Donald Knuth, who is a famous programmer, and then my own collaboration with Sander Stone when I was making a typeface for the Norwegian publisher Cappelen Damm, which I did by hand and then sent Sander Stone the drawings. So discussing all kinds of things connected with these reproductions, and also here tracing Antiqua letters during the Renaissance back to their basic, and then a typeface of my own in here called Bartolomeo, which is in progress. And at the end, there's a bit of terminology, typeface terminology, there's literature, and yeah, well, there we are. So that concludes that share. Right now, oh, someone sent me a heart. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So the next book, if you have time, bear with me. I hope you're still there. At least a few people are. Yeah. So it's this ABC for Owls. Sorry, but I will show you the. So I'm going to do the same to that now. The ABC for Adults book, it's not as sleazy as it sounds. Like there's no pornography in it. The closest thing you get to pornography is that the letter X can sometimes symbolize, something hidden and but yeah, like a red light district XXX kind of thing. And that's the closest thing it gets to pornography, but it's actually a pun on ABC for Adults. It's a letter from each it's from each it's there's a text from each letter for each God well, there's a text for each letter of the alphabet. And I'm going to show you what it is. Now, I have to show this as spreads because they're connected, right? So there's an illustration and there's a text connected to it. So let me just go and screen share once more. And yeah. So yes, it's dedicated to my son Daniel, who I am very fond of. He just turned 25. And the ABC for Adults, written, yeah, 20 or so years ago. And this is my typeface again, Renaissance under development. And there's a chart, a kind of a chart or a code to how to read the illustration, which is here on the left. Where you can see I'm trying to trace all the letters back to their origin in a very simple way. It's a very simplified and maybe to some oversimplified way of explaining the evolution of each letter back to the hieroglyphic through the Hebrew Phoenician and then the Greek Roman, and then after the Roman Empire, the uncial Carolingian Gothic cursive copperplate. Okay. Sorry, I need to sneeze. Oh dear. They usually come in like fives or six, so please pardon me. Preface. Never understood how to pronounce that. There's short texts. You don't have to read the whole book through. You can find your letter if you like. Um, so A, the king of the alphabet, tracing them back to the origin, hieroglyphic, Phoenician, or Hebrew. You might not say, maybe it's wrong to use the word Hebrew. Maybe you should say to Canaanite or something. The historians might correct me there. I'm not just, by the way, I'm not a historian and not an academic. I am a calligrapher with a passion for letters. And what I've been doing is I've been reading about letters and writing them and working as a calligrapher for 35 years, and I also taught for the same amount of time. And all my knowledge is like self-taught. Okay, so please don't expect me to be like as good at the history that a historian will actually be. Now, if you want to read a really solid scholarly book on the evolution of letters, I would suggest that you read Ewan Clayton's book. the golden thread. Now, this is a mix of being historically sound, full of metaphors and, sorry, not metaphors, full of anecdotes and whimsical distractions, and trying to write something that's interesting and historical and funny at the same time in the text. All right, so half entertainment, maybe half fact. Again, same. I'm also using each letter as a springboard to talk about anything I like, basically. All right. So in this, like, just to give you an example, most children love comics, and I was no exception. Donald Duck was a prominent figure. His Uncle Scrooge was constantly on the lookout for the bandits, the Beagle Boys, who in Norwegian simply were called the Bee Gang, connoting something second-rate, who wanted to help themselves to his fortune. It wasn't difficult to sympathize with them. Uncle Scrooge was a stingy fellow. In Norwegian, people who are nocturnally inclined, so-called late risers, are sometimes referred to as bee people, indicating that these people are second-rate. Right. Um, yeah. So there's all kinds of things in the text, and sometimes, the text illustrates what it says. I'm going to get to one of those here, where a Gothic fraktur D or even a Gothic rotunda on the Beer Duel, which is set in a rotunda Gothic, using the opportunity to spice up the text with, oops, the D. So in here, I'm going to zoom in. I'm using my typeface that which is uh, a digitized uncial form, which is none of them are released. In the text, just tiny stuff, basically. But yeah, E, Gothic E, Helvetica E, etc. So one for each letter in the alphabet. And now I can do things in my lecture which I can't do in the book. But what I'm talking about to start with is it doesn't really, I had a bit of a, I'm joking, but I'm half joking. I was traumatized by Eurythmics, or not the band, but Eurythmy, which the Rudolf Steiner school in Norway tried to make us do when I was in my seventh grade, meaning I was about uh, 14, 13, 14 years old. And they have these movements in the air, and the F goes like that. So, um, right. So each letter of the alphabet in eurythmy has a movement connected to it, and they try to make us do. I prefer calligraphy, and if I want to move around, I prefer Tai Chi. I don't like the mix-up. Right, the G, and about not missing my opportunity to talk about Claude Garamond, the famous type designer here, and yes, the H, the I. So it's basically my illustration in the middle is a Roman, like a calligraphed, broad-edged pen Roman letter, freely interpreted, and then even more freely interpreted with a ruling pen, which I talk about in my book literally, from that explosive moment of Friedrich Poppel where he starts to write with a ruling pen. So these are ruling pen letters on top in red, orange. Uh, the K, the L, again the literate typeface that I made with Sumner Stone. There is talk of Beatrice Ward in here, who was a famous uh, type historian and essayist during the 1920s in England, maybe 30s. Okay, so M, multiple master typefaces is mentioned. Um, the O. Yeah, like the O depressions that you get as a calligrapher when you try to make these two parts of the O match. See, really hard stuff. Very, very difficult. And I had to do a prize once, which was in Norwegian, Fotografiprisen, the prize of photography, like a photography prize. And I chose, of course, in my stupidity to use Roman capitals for the heading, not thinking that I have to make two O's, each O made with two strokes, and then each O being similar to the next. Because Roman capitals is very hard to make. They're very formal. You have almost no leeway, and yeah, hard to make, very hard to make. And getting O depressions is really just part of the job as a calligrapher. You get used to it. The P, which is of course the Greek letter for R. So here you see the Greek letter P, whereas this letter in Greek is the R letter. Uh, yeah, and as a side note, I actually read somewhere, and I'm not sure if it's totally true, but that in New Zealand, P is street lingo for methamphetamine. One of those things you come across. The Q, yes, and this is in all typeface specimens or samples going back in time. When they wanted to choose a typeface in the old days, they had to look through catalogs, right? And this is the most famous quote used by uh, type manufacturers and people selling their services as typesetters. Is this quote from Cicero or Cicero, and it's Quisque tandem abutere Catilina patientia nostra. How long, Catilina, will you exploit our patience? And it's because Catilina had planned a coup d'etat in Rome in 63 AD, which was exposed and which Cicero addresses in his speech. Now, the reason why they're using that is, well, one, it's in Latin, so they wanted all typefaces in the European tradition, most of them, look much better in Latin. All the connected languages, the French, the Italian, the Spanish, look much better than setting it in Norwegian, or for that matter, even worse, setting it in Vietnamese, which use the Latin written language or printed language, or even Turkish. But yeah, the languages that get closer to Latin look a lot better when they set type in it. So they chose something Latin, and then of course in most of the typefaces they could display their wonderful tail on the Q. You see, because the Kikero quote starts off with a Q, so very often that is a just an excuse to display that tail. That is so tempting for people to put a tail on, not only for kids but also for grown-up type designers. The R, I found it funny that uh, in Latin the R was nicknamed littera canina, the dog's letter. And this is something I've heard, okay? I'm not a Latin speaker myself, so this is by hearsay. But it was pronounced the way that a dog growls. And apparently, in some parts of Italy, they pronounced it or something to that effect. Maybe like people in Bergen in Norway, who knows? The dog's growl, littera canina, the dog's letter. Right, but it's also mentioned as a side note to that in Romeo and Juliet, where the nurse asks if Rosemary and Romeo doesn't start with the same letter. She asks Juliet this, and saying that the letter R is the dog's name. Okay, trying to put Romeo down. So all kinds of excuses to write little stories and try to embellish the text with sidetracks and anecdotes and all kinds of whimsical stuff. S, and of course the old school S and different phenomena connected with that. Now I need to round this up, so I'm nearing the end. Just to mention that the word text comes from Latin textus, meaning weaving, and that calligraphers, when we write text, we often feel a little bit like weaving a texture. And of course, the word texture is always also connected to the Latin word weaving. It's very close to that. And the U, yes, as we all know, the Romans, as well, most of us know, the Romans didn't have a U, and it appeared later on in the late Middle Ages. The V, of course, is a peace sign, but it's also a victory sign for some. And yeah, there's a lot of people watching football these days. I couldn't care less myself, really. But in football, there was a football match between England and Norway. We never beat the English. They're so good at it. This is not this is soccer, not American football. Now, after the match, we won 2-1. And the Norwegians didn't realize that doing this to an Englishman is not good. Okay, it basically means up your arse. And they did this to people, the English supporters who came to Oslo, and did this, and fights broke out because of the misunderstanding, right? So we should be careful about hand gestures, I guess, but anything symbolic. Anything symbolic. The W is, of course, an older addition to the alphabet. And the X, like I said, the pornographic triple X, but also something unknown, something hidden, the X Factor, X Files, etc., Generation X. And yeah, X in the eyes of a comic figure indicates its death. Right, and the Y? So just an interesting thing, if you've seen a sign where it says ye old shop, a thorn sign is often used to pronounce the TH because it was lacking when they set type in lead, and the thorn was often substituted by a Y. So there are reasons why ye old shop is supposed to be something old, but it's actually because they missed a substitute in their setikasse. What is that in English? It's in the box of type, in the set of type, basically. The Z. Now, according to Herman's app, the Z is the most underrated letter of the English language, and he actually made a wonderful poster doing this, telling this little story of the letter Z. And well, I always think of the type designer calligrapher Herman's app when I do the letter Z, and I can hardly ever keep myself from doing a swoosh at the end because you're finally at the end of the alphabet. And at the end, I've got a very shortened historical overview in this book. Literature and anatomy of the letters. Now, in this book, I've actually forgotten to put in Ewan Clayton's book, The Golden Thread, which you should Google if you want, and stop share. So here we are. I'm at the end of my, not rope, but lecture, and I hope you enjoyed yourself. Thank you very much for joining, and I hope I didn't bore you too much with too much nerdy information about letters. And if you want to subscribe to my newsletter, you can go to my homepage, and it'll come up automatically if you screen down. And maybe I'll see you in one of my workshops. And if not, take care of one another and stay sane in these crazy political times. Take care of one another. Thank you for joining. Bye bye.